Hi, it's Paul Guppy with the Washington Policy Center with our latest information this week about what's going on in our state. As always, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate that. We also appreciate looking at the comments too. I, I enjoy reading through the comments. Positive, negative, it's fine. I love to hear from people. The topics I'm going to cover today are new job losses in Seattle, a wolf recovery program that is working in our state, the latest hypocrisy, I might say, coming out of our Attorney General's office here, a new payroll tax increase that's coming January 1st, and some quick thoughts on the election, a little bit nationally, but everybody talks about that. So I think what was really more interesting is what the impact of the election was here in Washington state and what indicators there are going into next year. So let's just start off here. It's national news that Amazon announced national layoffs of 14,000 people. That's about 4% of their workforce. The question is, how does that affect Washington state and Seattle? Seattle is a headquarters for Amazon. And the answer is Amazon is laying off a couple of thousand people in our state as well. The vast majority of that job loss is happening in the city of Seattle, according to the Employment Security Department. And that's 1,887 positions that are being eliminated in Seattle. Bellevue is losing about 284 positions. What struck me about that disparity between those two numbers is that, yes, Bellevue is losing Amazon workers as well, but far fewer than is one that's happening in Seattle. So if you work this management process backwards as an analysis, you begin to think, what are Amazon executives thinking of as the way they distribute these job losses? And the answer is a shift from Seattle to Bellevue and other places where losses are less. And so in other words, two things are going on. They are reducing the number of their broad workforce. That's happening nationally. But how that loss is distributed indicates it's a market indicator of what the business climate is like in Seattle compared to Bellevue and other places where Amazon operates. That is an early signal to Seattle leaders that they're creating a hostile business climate. Amazon is not going to announce something like that. Businesses very seldom say government policy is driving us out of the city, because that just creates controversy for them, and they don't want to get involved in that. But when you see the results of how they are moving people around, that is an indicator that Seattle is measurable job losses are happening in the city. And yet at the same time, Seattle officials constantly tout their left-wing policies, things like the executive head tax, lots of regulations, green energy programs, things like that, that do create higher costs for businesses, and therefore they shift someplace else. And yet, pretty soon, as Seattle does lose business, you'll be hearing about that Seattle has a budget crisis and that there are falling revenues. And oh my gosh, we're going to have a higher sales tax or higher property taxes. This is the standard pattern that happens all the time. It gets to the point where, to me, these budget predictions become boring. You already know what the mayor, the city council, the governor, the state legislator, as soon as you hear the word budget, you know that they're going to ask for more revenue in some convoluted diplomatic phrases that hides what they're doing, but that means more cost on us and more money for them. So that's the pattern that we're predicting. The other thing is that free market economics is dynamic, capitalism is dynamic. That's why it's such a strong creative force, and AI and other things are causing job changes in the tech world. That's what's called creative destruction. Old systems break down and new ones are created. That's how the West and the United States won the Cold War. Our economy is dynamic and growing. Communist, socialist economies tend to stagnate. The question becomes, however, is where do new jobs and opportunity and investment go? And if policymakers are not creating an attractive business environment generally, not just for one industry, but across the board, then those opportunities are going to tend to go elsewhere. And that is a troubling trend that we see not only with the city of Seattle, but with Washington state in general. And I've mentioned this before, are concerned that Washington state begins to lose out compared to other regions of the country. So we'll see how that trend develops. Next is a success story with the Endangered Species Act. Our expert Pam Lewison has been following this closely, which is wild gray wolf population recovery in Washington state. There's a federal plan in place. The State Department of Fish and Wildlife tracks this as well. And it's been so successful that that depredations or deaths among domesticated animals is becoming a problem. So this is a wildlife management issue. The Department of Fish and Wildlife wants to cull or reduce some of the wild wolf population. That shows that they've recovered, particularly in the northeastern part of the state. And environmental groups sued, as you would expect, and the news is that a judge just removed the injunction against the Fish and Wildlife. I think they want to kill one wolf that is creating a problem and change the hunting pattern of this particular pack. And there's a lot of biological and science involved here that I'm not going to get into all the details, but the policy part is allowing the State Department of Fish and Wildlife to manage the wolf population. This is also mirrored by the state's Indian tribes, which have much more latitude and freedom in how they manage their own natural resources. The Colville tribe in the northeastern part of the state has open season on wolves all the time for tribal members. They see it as no problem of reducing this population in a reasonable way. The larger policy issue, and we would recommend to wacky left-wing environmentalists that they should celebrate a win once in a while. The reason the Endangered Species Act, passed in the 1970s, is so popular is because it preserves endangered species. That's what everybody wants. When that is accomplished, then we think that environmentalists shouldn't fight the policy. They should celebrate and say, see, it works. And that would grow popular support and improve the environment as well. So we think it was a mistake for them to run to a judge and try to shut down this management program. The judge has turned that around for the moment. But again, the recovery of the wolf population in Washington state is a sign of success, and we think we should build on that. Next is a little bit of hypocrisy coming out of the Attorney General's office here in the state. That's Nick Brown. He recently co-led, as he puts it, a letter with 15 other attorney generals across the state against the Trump administration repealing a reporting requirement, which I'll describe in a second. I'm not sure what co-leading on a co-signed letter means. There's a little bit of bragging there, but the objection is that the Trump administration wants to repeal a reporting requirement that dates from 2009. This reporting requirement is Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, GHGRP, GRIP, or something like that, some kind of government acronym. We compliment the Trump administration in deregulating. There are hundreds and thousands of ridiculous reporting requirements that private industries, employers have to send to the government. Some data is important. It's important to know what's happening with the economy, but these reports can become so time-consuming and detailed that it really pulls resources out of the public sector. That is what the Trump administration is trying to cut down on. Nick Brown in our state, the Attorney General, he's against that. He wants this regulation to stay in place. And okay, I understand his position. He's for it. But at the same time, Washington state itself, as Todd Myers on our staff has pointed out, is not reporting its own carbon emissions requirements as required by state law. So the department that's in charge of this at the state level has not reported carbon emissions. They say that they won't report 2022-23 carbon emissions until 2026. So they're years behind in reporting, and yet our state Attorney General is complaining about a national level policy which is trying to repeal those requirements. So that's where the hypocrisy comes in. We would recommend that the state, lead by example. If they think that carbon emission reporting is so important, they should go ahead and just do it at the state level and then argue it at the national level. So there's contradiction right there. Next is a new payroll tax that's coming into place. Well, an increase in an existing payroll tax. That's the paid family leave payroll tax. The Department of Employment Security Department is announcing that W-2 worker payroll tax will go up on January 1st from 0.92% to 1.13% of payroll. That's a 22% tax increase. So that's a big tax increase. And it will mean that workers across the state will have to pay higher taxes. The way the tax is structured is that businesses pay 72% of the tax and workers pay 29% of the tax, and it's calculated on gross pay. But here's where the deception is. Workers actually pay 100% of the tax because what an employer looks at is how much money does it cost to get a person to come to work for me? And they add up all the benefits, the take-home pay for that person, federal taxes and state taxes and these payroll taxes. An employer adds all that together and comes up with $1 number as to how much it costs to hire somebody. And then they do hire that person if it pencils out and makes sense. So this idea that payroll taxes are divided between the employer and the employee is actually a false economic concept. The entire earnings are on the employee. And so workers actually pay the entire tax because it's based on what their market availability is in the labor market and how much it costs the employer to bring that person on board. So there's a little background economic lesson there. But back to the payroll tax on the Family Leave Act is that most of the benefit has gone to higher wage workers, people making $61 an hour or more. That's what the data shows so far. And yet the so-called trust fund that the Employment Security Department runs is constantly short on money, and therefore they are raising the payroll tax. They will probably raise it again in the future. This trust fund is projected rather, to be $350 million short by the year 2029. This current tax increase is not going to meet that. The other reason I put trust fund in quotes is because it's not really a trust fund. The legislature sweeps through these funds all the time. The state has dozens of labeled trust funds, but in real accounting terms, that doesn't mean anything. The lawmakers can spend this money on whatever they like, whenever they want, and they often do. So, and they claim that they're going to backfill, and sometimes they do that too. But this term trust fund does not mean the same thing in the public sector as it does in the private sector. But overall, increasing payroll taxes is, of course, going to hurt unemployment as we go into next year. So that's coming up. Now, some quick thoughts about the recent election. Lots of coverage about that, so I certainly don't need to go into the details. But I do think there's been a lack of perspective. To me, as someone who's followed politics nationally for years through my entire career, it was never a surprise to me that Democrats were going to win in Democrat states, New York and New Jersey in particular. Virginia is a little bit more of a swing state. If Republicans had won, that would have been an earthquake. So basically, it's a case of the Democrats winning as expected. That does give them momentum and energy going into 2026, and that is definitely something that Republicans, again, nationally have to be concerned about. They should not pretend that these recent elections mean nothing. And the number one issue, apparently, is affordability. So that's, again, a warning sign for Republicans nationally that they should focus on that issue. What we focus on here is what is the impact in Washington state. I had mentioned a couple of state Senate races that Republicans were contending. Republicans lost both of those races, so Democrats have retained those two seats, and that means that going into the next legislative session, Democrats will once again be firmly in control in the Senate and in the state House. And so they will be the majority party. And again, it's consistent. That indicates that there's not going to be a change anytime soon. At the local level, the message was a little different. Many moderate and conservative candidates did win at the local level, often in nonpartisan races where there aren't party labels on the ballot. One example is J.T. Wilcox, former Republican leader from the House. He won a position on the Tacoma Port Commission. And in Edmonds City Council, which is relatively moderate to conservative, those members were reelected. Also in Edmonds, voters defeated a proposed local tax increase there. So there are some indications that people do want to bring common sense to the ballot, particularly when partisan considerations are taken out and people are just thinking about good representation and issues that are important to them and their own communities. Also in Spokane, again, consistency, the city council there stayed fairly left-wing, particularly one candidate that I looked up, Zach Zapponi, his name is, and he was reelected to the council, pretty left-wing Democrat. But also what's interesting is what he campaigned on, and he specifically said that he had been on the council before and that he had voted to fund the police. So that sent a signal to me that this idea of defund the police is dead, dead, dead. When even Democrats are citing their record of support for police and law enforcement, that's a positive thing across the board. It means that has now gone back to being a bipartisan issue of supporting public safety. Public safety was also a #1 issue in the Seattle mayor's race, which has yet to be decided, but both candidates were saying how much they supported public safety. So again, a positive sign for our communities. The other interesting result from the election happened in Spokane Valley, a more conservative area. They retained a conservative city council there, but also in a warning sign, a little bit like what I mentioned about Amazon with Seattle. The same case study happened in Spokane as well, where a luxury car dealership, Land Rover, moved out of the city of Spokane, and they moved not very far away, but to a different jurisdiction of Spokane Valley, because when that business was located in Spokane, they had over $100,000 of vandalism happen in their dealership. And no business can support that. And free market economics requires peace. If you want to have commerce, you have to have stability and public safety. And Spokane is showing that they weren't able to provide that, at least for this one business. Seattle has trouble in the downtown area providing that as well. So we take that as sort of non-ideological, non-partisan, non-political. This is just people who want to be able to engage in commerce, live their lives, and not have to worry about crime, shoplifting, vandalism, violence happening in their community. And that's an important issue across the board. I'll wrap up with those issues and be back in the future with another update. We have some events coming up. One is next Tuesday. If you loved my analysis of the election, you get more on the go on Tuesday. Next Tuesday. I'll be talking more about the election in detail. Also, we have an event coming up November 19th in Spokane Valley. It's a free event called Saving Our Hospitals, about healthcare finance. And if you're in the area, we hope that you'll be able to attend that as well. So thanks for listening.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.